welcome to The Firm. On the show this week,
non-residents rejoice, promoters worried. The tale of two capital gains tax decisions and the difference between shall and may in SEBI's draft consent regulations.
our top story this week is a 2-in-1. There's good news and bad news for taxpayers on the capital gains front. The good news first. Under a Delhi High Court order, non-resident taxpayers can now benefit of the lower tax rate of 10% on gains made in off-market transactions. The bad news, a recent Punjab and Haryana High Court order has upset the precedent on sale of shares by promoters. Vaishwani Upadhyay reports on both these rulings and their impact.
The first case settles the much-vexed issue of capital gains tax rate applicability on non-residents. The case involves Kane UK and pertains to a transaction that took place in 2009. At that point, Kane UK held a 64.68% stake in Indian public listed company Kane India. In an off-market transaction, Kane sold 2.29% of its stake in Kane India to Mauritius-based Petronas Corporation. It went to the tax department for a withholding certificate stating tax payable on capital gains is at the lower rate of 10% and not 20%. Section 112 of the Income Tax Act allows the taxpayer to pay tax at the rate of 10% before availing of indexation benefit. Kane proposed to avail of this benefit and the benefit of foreign currency fluctuation under Section 48. Revenue argued that the 10% rate is available only for resident investors as only they can claim indexation benefit. And if a lower tax rate is allowed, it would lead to a double benefit of foreign currency fluctuation adjustment and a lower tax rate of 10% on long-term capital gains.
In that transaction, the real contention was whether Kane UK, in addition to paying tax at a concessional rate of 10%, is also eligible to claim the protection of foreign exchange fluctuation, which otherwise a foreign investor is eligible to claim. The provisions of Section 112, which provides for this lower tax rate, states that if you are a domestic investor, then you are not entitled to any inflation adjustment, and therefore the tax department contended that as a foreign investor, you are not entitled to foreign exchange fluctuation.
To seek clarity on the rate of taxation, Kane UK approached the Authority for Advanced Rulings. The AAR made a first of its kind observation. It said that the tax rate on long-term capital gains arising out of an off-market sale of listed securities will differ between residents and non-residents. A resident taxpayer can index the cost of acquisition. For a non-resident, the cost of acquisition can be adjusted for currency fluctuations. It concluded that a non-resident cannot take a double benefit of protection against foreign exchange fluctuation and a lower tax rate of 10%.
AAR was clearly inconsistent in its ruling because in an earlier case it has clearly held that the rate of tax should be 10%, and this was not one ruling. I think several rulings were given by the AAR. Surprisingly, the AAR changed its stance and started holding that the rate of tax should be 20%.
Aggrieved by AAR's interpretation, Kane filed a writ petition in the Delhi High Court. Last week, the court ruled in Kane's favor, giving it the benefit of currency adjustments and a lower tax rate of 10%. The Delhi High Court observed that if the legislature intended to deny a non-resident this double benefit, the Income Tax Act would have explicitly said so.
In last year's budget, there was an amendment to say that if there is a gain on sale of unlisted securities, the gain will be taxed at 10% and the domestic investors will not be allowed any indexation benefit, and the foreign investors will not be allowed any foreign exchange fluctuation benefit. So again, this is exactly the point that Delhi High Court is saying. If there was an intent not to allow foreign investor to take the benefit of foreign exchange fluctuation, there should have been a specific provision.
I think the Delhi High Court ruling, in my view, is landmark because it settles a very important principle which was debated as a result of inconsistent rulings of the Advanced Ruling Authority. More importantly, when non-residents exit or change their shareholding, which triggers off capital gains on their transactions, need higher level of certainty. And I think these sets of inconsistent rulings was leading to a greater level of uncertainty insofar as taxability of non-resident capital gains is concerned. So I think this issue, at least insofar as the High Court as a judicial forum is concerned, is a settled debate.
This Delhi High Court order will bring huge relief not only for Kane UK but several other non-resident taxpayers. Chicago Pneumatic Tool is fighting a similar battle in the Bombay High Court. Several cases are pending before various tribunals. For now, taxpayers litigating this issue before tribunals can take advantage of this beneficial ruling by the Delhi High Court. Now, on to the bad news. For that, let's go across to the Punjab and Haryana High Court for yet another first-of-its-kind view. Last month, the Punjab and Haryana High Court held that if promoters are selling shares with management rights, the sale proceeds should be treated as business income. Here's the backstory. In 2005, the promoters of XL Colnet sold their shares in the company under a share purchase agreement to Pugmarks Interweb. The promoters offered the gains on this sale of shares to tax as long-term capital gains. The tax department alleged that the transfer was not of a capital asset but was in fact transfer of the company's business. It argued that the transaction should be taxed as business income as it is not a simple transfer of shares but in fact a transfer of control. The Chandigarh Tribunal accepted Revenue's view.
I think so far as the individual is concerned, he had transferred a capital asset, namely shares of the company. The individual, it is nobody's case that the individual is in the business of promoting and selling ventures. It will become business income only in that situation if that was his business or that was his vocation. There is no such finding by, I assume by the assessing officer. I have not had the benefit of going through the order of the assessing officer. But if he has only sold shares of the company and it is not his business to be promoting ventures and selling such ventures, I don't see how this can become business income.
But the Punjab and Haryana High Court ruled it to be so and affirmed the tribunal's judgment on grounds that the share purchase agreement included not just the transfer of shares but also management rights. The promoters also transferred business assets such as employee database, product database, customer proposals in pipeline, customer data and contracts. A non-compete clause in the agreement prevented the promoters from entering a similar business for 2 years. The share purchase agreement provided for specific clauses such as non-usage of brand, web domain and non-solicitation of present and future employees of the company. And so, the High Court concluded that the transaction was a transfer of business and not just the transfer of shares, and upheld the tax department's view to tax the gains as business income.
I think there are several principles which need to be considered here. In the first place, it is a piercing of corporate veil. When does a corporate veil when is a corporate veil permitted to be pierced? There have to be really specific, very glaring and rare circumstances, one of which would be that if the transaction on the face of it is a sham transaction. From the facts that are available in the order, it does not seem that it was a sham transaction, and therefore there doesn't seem to be a grave enough cause for the corporate veil to be pierced. The second principle that the Supreme Court established in the Vodafone judgment, that a transaction should be looked at and not looked through by dissecting the documents, which apparently, or which on the face of it are perfectly in order for such kind of transaction. And the third thing is that the distinction between a company as a corporate entity and the shareholder seems to have been completely done away with.
I only hope that the department does not take a clue from such a decision and hold that in all cases where there is transfer of shares of a company which results in transfer of control, transfer of ownership, they treat it as a transfer of business of the company and seek to tax it as business income instead of capital gains. I think it will be completely far-fetched. In my understanding, the judgment is not correctly decided.
If the tax department were to apply this principle laid down by the High Court, almost every promoter sale to private equity will become a business income transaction. experts say that such an interpretation could create havoc, as the clauses based on which the court has ruled the transaction as transfer of business are standard to most share purchase agreements. That brings me to the close of our 2-in-1 top story on capital gains. Worried promoters and rejoicing non-resident investors. In Mumbai, by Spani Upadhyay.